You're not jealous of their life, you're grieving yours. Not the one you're living, but the one you abandoned. The version of you that still flickers beneath the performance. The voice that once whispered dreams before the noise of the world drowned it out. That's the pain behind comparison, not inadequacy, not pettiness, grief. You see someone thriving, glowing, doing what you once dared to want, and something breaks open. Not because they have it, but because some part of you remembers that you could have had it too. And maybe still could. Carl Jung would tell you that this isn't just emotion, it's revelation. It's your shadow speaking, unfiltered, unedited. It doesn't show up in polite words, it shows up in discomfort. In the flick of the stomach, in that invisible punch to the heart when someone else seems to be living your unlived life. You've been taught to call it envy, to feel ashamed. But it isn't shameful, it's sacred. It's the soul's alarm bell, the scream beneath the silence. The ache of a self that was never allowed to be. And if you listen closely, it's not saying I want what they have, it's saying I want back what I lost. There's a man you've never heard of. He worked at a small publishing house in Warsaw. He used to write poetry but stopped in his 30s. Life got loud. He got married, had kids, needed money. He told himself he'd write again once things settled. They never did. One day a friend from university published a book of poems and became a name. The man smiled for the photos, but later that night he tore apart the drawer where he kept his old verses and wept over pages yellowed by years of avoidance. He wasn't mourning the friend's success, he was mourning his own silence. This is how envy often works. Quiet, delayed, dignified on the outside, aching underneath. You think you're comparing, but what you're really doing is remembering. The ache isn't that they're ahead, it's that somewhere you stepped away from yourself, and now someone else's life has made you feel it. Jung warned that what we don't bring to consciousness appears outside as fate. You'll keep bumping into versions of yourself wearing someone else's name until you turn and face the truth. You're not behind, you're misplaced. And that's a wound that only honesty can heal. So be honest, not performative, not motivational, just real. Say it to yourself without judgment, I miss who I could have been. Not to wallow, but to wake up. Because that ache you feel when someone else shines, that hollow pull in the chest, isn't your weakness. It's your shadow reminding you that you're still alive. And that there's still time to speak, time to return, time to become. Not like them, like you. Not who the world taught you to be, but who you were before the world taught you to hide. The person you envy isn't your rival, they're the mirror. And today you looked in it long enough to see past the reflection. Now the real question begins, not why do I compare myself to others, but what is this pain trying to return me to? And if you're brave enough to follow that question all the way down, you just might find the version of yourself you thought was gone forever. There's a version of you living a life you never chose. A path shaped by borrowed desires. Dreams inherited from other people's expectations. Metrics defined by systems you never agreed to but learned to chase anyway. You think you want success, recognition, beauty, status. But peel back the layers and you might find something else. You want to be enough. That's what comparison really is. It's not about them. It's about you trying to answer a question that was planted in you before you knew how to ask it. Am I enough yet? René Girard called it mimetic desire. The idea that we don't want things because we want them, but because we see others wanting them. We imitate longing. We mirror hunger. We mistake reflection for direction. Carl Jung took it further. He said we create a persona, a mask stitched together from the roles we think we have to play to be loved. But underneath the persona lives the shadow, everything we rejected to become acceptable. And the more we hide that shadow, the more we compare, because comparison is projection. You see their confidence and feel small because yours has gone unexpressed. You see their joy and feel numb because yours is buried. You see their life and feel lost because yours has been mapped by everyone but you. And no one teaches you to question this. They teach you to compete, to improve, to silence the ache with productivity and polish. But the ache isn't going away because it isn't brokenness, it's wisdom. It's the part of you that remembers what you really wanted before the copying began. You didn't ask for this life of endless mirrors. It was given to you slowly through childhood praise, through silent disapproval, through scrolling feeds and filtered faces. And so you learn to measure yourself through other people's expressions, their wins, their timelines, their applause. And now you don't know what success feels like unless someone else envies you for it. That is not a failure. It's a system you didn't consent to, but you can walk away from it. That's the paradox Jung leaves us with. The only way to stop comparing yourself to others is to stop trying to become someone at all, and instead return. Return to the part of you that never needed to be the best, just needed to be whole. That's where freedom lives. Not in winning the game. In walking off the field, you're not falling behind, you're waking up. And the person you used to envy, they were just a reminder, not of what you lack, but of what you've left behind. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like something's missing, like something's been avoided, like a truth has been swallowed and is still sitting in the throat. That silence is shame, but not the shame of doing something wrong. The shame of becoming someone smaller than who you were supposed to be. Not by choice, by surrender, quiet, unnoticed surrender. 1,000 tiny moments of saying yes when you meant no, of nodding when you wanted to speak, of shrinking because you thought that's what it meant to belong. And then one day, someone else lives out a version of the life you used to imagine, and it hits you. Not as envy, but as collapse. You're not upset because they're ahead. You're grieving because they remind you of the version of yourself you walked away from. Carl Jung warned that what we reject doesn't disappear, it waits. The shadow doesn't vanish when we put on the persona, it watches. And when someone else walks through the world with the light you dimmed in yourself, the shadow doesn't whisper, it roars. This is the part no one teaches you to face. The emotional physics of comparison, the way shame and envy aren't opposites, they're twins. You don't envy someone unless you secretly believe you could have had what they have. You don't feel inferior unless some part of you once dreamed bigger. That's what makes the pain so personal. Because you're not just looking at what someone else has. You're looking at who you might have been. And that pain, if left unspoken, becomes poison. It doesn't stay contained. It starts to shape your identity. Not as ambition, as avoidance. You start playing it safe. You tell yourself they're lucky or fake or privileged. You create stories to protect yourself from the real wound, the truth that you might have had a shot but didn't take it. There's a man I once heard about who trained as a classical pianist through his 20s. He was good, not famous, but gifted. Then life intervened. He took a steady job. He put away the keys. He said it was just a break. Years passed. One day he heard his own son, barely 7, playing the piano he had once loved, and something shattered. Not out of pride, not out of nostalgia, out of shame. He wasn't angry that his son was gifted. He was haunted that he had once been. That's what shame does. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sounds like a door slowly closing. Sometimes it sounds like someone else playing your song better than you ever dared to. And you smile because you've learned to be kind. But deep down you want to weep. Not because you lost, because you left. Jung said, to confront a person with their shadow is to show them their light. But light hurts when you've been living in the comfort of dimness. Because dimness asks nothing of you. It keeps you safe, unseen, unjudged. but it also keeps you longing. So here's the truth, spoken without armor. That envy you feel, it's not weakness, it's unclaimed power. And that shame you carry, it's not proof that you're broken. It's evidence that a deeper self still remembers what you were made for, and it's waiting. Not to punish you, but to be picked up again, to be played again, to be lived. And it's not too late. Not if you're still feeling it. Not if the ache still burns when someone else steps into a spotlight you once imagined for yourself. That pain is not your enemy, it's your cue. You can hate them or admire them or scroll past them. Or you can ask the only question that matters: what did I stop believing was possible for me? And if you sit with that question long enough, the silence may begin to change. Not into noise, but into music. Your music, not performed, not perfected, but finally played. There is a part of you that doesn't want what everyone else has. It wants what you lost, and the only reason you compare is because you've forgotten what that was. Jung called it the gold in the shadow, the pieces of your soul you abandoned to be accepted. The instincts, gifts, desires that didn't fit the persona, so you buried them. And over time, they stopped feeling like parts of you. Until someone else lives them out, and you feel it. Not intellectually, viscerally. Like a punch to the chest. A drop in your stomach. A heat behind your eyes that you pretend is tiredness, but is really something older than exhaustion, recognition. And for a second, something in you wakes up. Not to attack, to remember. But because we're trained to see envy as something shameful, you push it back down. You call it immaturity, pettiness, jealousy. But it isn't, it's memory. It's your unconscious holding up a flare. And if you ignore it, that flare doesn't disappear. It just turns into bitterness. You start to resent people who are doing nothing wrong, just living their truth while you pretend yours doesn't exist. This is where most people stay, but not you. You've read this far. You've heard your shadow call you by name, so now you choose. You can either continue performing a version of your life that fits the script, or you can interrupt it. You can ask, honestly, painfully, what part of me did I abandon to be safe? And wait for the answer. That's when the shift begins. Because you realize the people you've envied aren't freer than you, they're just louder. They're not always happier, or wiser, or deeper. They're just saying yes to parts of themselves that you're still apologizing for. And the moment you stop apologizing for wanting more voice, more space, more truth, that's the moment comparison begins to dissolve. Because the hunger is being fed at its source. There's a Taoist parable of a frog who lives in a well. He thinks the circle of sky he sees above is the entire world. Then one day he's pulled out by accident and sees the ocean. He doesn't feel joy, he feels terror. This is what it's like to glimpse your unlived life. Not exciting at first, overwhelming. Because now you know the well was only part of the story. And you can't go back. That's what the shadow does. It pulls you from the well. It floods you with envy, not to torture you, but to expose the edges of your container. And to ask you one thing, are you ready to grow beyond it? This isn't about winning, or catching up, or outshining anyone. It's about shedding the borrowed dreams, the mimicry, the hunger for applause. And standing quietly in the middle of your own truth. It won't always feel comfortable. It might even feel lonely at first, but it will feel real. And in a world built on pretending, that is the first step toward becoming whole. It doesn't happen in a moment of triumph. It happens in a moment of stillness. You stop chasing, you stop scrolling. You stop adjusting the volume of your life based on how loud everyone else seems. And for the first time, the question isn't, how do I catch up? But why was I racing in the first place? That's when something breaks. Not you, the illusion. The illusion that your value depends on being ahead. The illusion that your piece is waiting somewhere at the finish line. The illusion that someone else's light somehow subtracts from your own. Carl Jung called this turning point individuation, not perfection, not victory, but the slow, deliberate unfolding of the person you were always meant to become once you stopped trying to become someone else. That's why the race feels so exhausting. It was never designed for your pace, your path, or your purpose. It's a circuit built from imitation, approval, and silent self-betrayal. And the moment you step off that track, even if only for a breath, you realize you were never behind. You were just busy living according to measurements that had nothing to do with your soul. Here's the truth almost no one tells you: you don't heal envy by achieving more. You heal it by realizing that someone else's life is not your assignment. You don't need to replicate their steps. You need to listen to the silence inside you, the part of you that's been waiting, not to win, but to arrive. The envy begins to quiet, not because you've risen above it, but because it's been heard, understood, seen. You now recognize it not as a flaw to hide, but as a compass that was misread. A signal that something in you needed expression, not suppression. The people you once compared yourself to? You begin to see them differently. They're not rivals, not warnings, just other travelers. Their victories no longer indict you. Their joy no longer dims your own. And without realizing it, you begin to walk differently. You stop trying to outrun them. You stop trying to impress shadows. You start asking deeper questions. What rhythm belongs to me? What am I called to create, not for applause, but for alignment? What does success feel like when no one is watching? And slowly, as the questions deepen, the noise fades, the comparison dissolves. Not because you've become invulnerable, but because you've become centered. You are no longer leaning on the life of another to feel worthy. You are standing in your own. And from that ground, you realize that envy was never about them. It was the echo of your own unlived voice, trying to get your attention. And now you're listening, not to compete, but to return. To begin again, not at the starting line of someone else's story, but at the center of your own. It's easy to forget how long you've been holding your breath, how long you've been performing, comparing, shrinking. Pretending that watching others live your dreams didn't hurt. But the ache was never weakness, it was recognition of a life unlived, a light postponed, a truth waiting in the dark. And now you see it. Not as a wound to hide, but as a home to come back to. Carl Jung wrote, "There is only one way, and that is your way. Not the faster way, not the flashier way. Not the one that fits into a caption or can be tracked by followers, your way. The messy, imperfect, private way. The one that doesn't need envy to feel purposeful. One that doesn't need applause to feel real. That's the path you're on now." And no, it didn't start at the top. It didn't go viral. It didn't make sense to anyone else. But for the first time, it makes sense to you because it's yours. And every moment spent chasing someone else's life was not wasted. It was part of the remembering, the clearing, the reawakening. You are not behind, you are becoming. Every pang of jealousy, every moment of shame, every story you told yourself about being less, that was the soil. The roots are already there. And now it's time to bloom. Not louder, truer. Not faster, deeper. Not for them, for you. And as you step forward, you may notice something unexpected. You no longer need to prove. You no longer need to catch up. You no longer need to look sideways to find your direction. You are no longer searching for your reflection in someone else's mirror, because you're finally seeing yourself in your own light. And that light, it was never gone. It was just waiting. Waiting for the moment you would stop scrolling, stop comparing, stop apologizing, and begin. So if this story stirred something in you, if it felt like a mirror for the parts you've long ignored, then don't keep it quiet. Let it speak, let it move. Let it remind someone else that their envy isn't shameful, it's sacred. And if you're ready to live the life you once envied, don't rush, don't race. Just return to yourself. That is where your journey begins. And where comparison ends,